Welcome to the What If It's Not Depression podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Achina Stein. And today we're going to be talking about intermittent fasting and how it can affect your mood and improve your mood. Cynthia Thurlow is a nurse practitioner, author of the best-selling book, Intermittent Fasting Transformation. She's a two-time TEDx speaker with her second talk having more than 13 million views, and the host of Everyday Wellness Podcast and co-host of the Intermittent Fasting Podcast with Melanie Avalon, averaging more than 700,000 downloads per month combined. With over 20 years experience in health and wellness, Cynthia is a globally recognized expert in intermittent fasting and women's health and has been featured on ABC, Fox 5, KTLA, CW, Medium, Entrepreneur, and the Megyn Kelly Show. Her mission is to educate women on the benefits of intermittent fasting and overall holistic health and wellness so they feel empowered to live their most optimal lives. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. And hey, everyone, if you like this episode, please click the like button and subscribe. So tell us how you got into intermittent fasting and also functional medicine.
Yeah, I think it really started or stemmed from a desire to be intellectually challenged. I started as an ER nurse in inner city Baltimore, and it was not a surprising turn for me to leap into cardiology. I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. And so I was in clinical cardiology and medical cardiology in the hospital as well for over 16 years. And after I had kids, I just started to think very differently about food and nutrition. I mean, I was always a healthy eater, but I had a child with life-threatening food allergies. And so that sent me down a rabbit hole of really looking at food much more intentionally. And there's a book I read called The Unhealthy Truth by Robin O'Brien that changed everything for me. And from there, I started thinking or second guessing, my career choice. I started thinking about, did I want to go into academia? And so I took one class in a PhD program and I didn't love it. And then I did a wellness coaching certification. And although I enjoyed that, I didn't love it. And so I really stumbled into initially a functional nutrition training program, and that lit me up. And that really kind of got me more interested in a functional integrative approach. And so I left clinical cardiology in 2016 and took this massive leap of faith into becoming an entrepreneur. And prior to that, when I was much more interested in talking to my patients about lifestyle as medicine, it also included intermittent fasting. And so I came to it as organically as many people do. I was the typical perimenopausal woman who was suddenly weight loss resistant, and every bit of advice I'd been giving my patients for years was not effective or not working. And intermittent fasting on a lot of different levels changed everything for me. Obviously I didn't lose weight initially, but I had tremendous mental clarity. I had so much more energy. I was sleeping better. Eventually I lost the weight I gained in the beginning of perimenopause. And so that really became a platform and a strategy that I wanted to talk to everyone about. And it wasn't really until I had my own business that it allowed me the opportunity to do so and to function in the way that I wanted to with my patient population. So came to it very organically. Obviously, it's without question, it's something that I'm known for, but metabolic health is really what I'm most passionate to talk to patients about and clients and anyone on social media, because that encompasses so many things. And I know we have this shared appreciation for mental health and mental wellness as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. It's very important for women to know that the old school thoughts of exercising and decreasing calories is not necessarily the only way to be able to lose weight. That might work for a few people, some women, but especially in perimenopause, it's particularly more difficult to lose weight. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think what most people don't realize is perimenopause, the 10 to 15 years preceding menopause, starts in our mid 30s. So if you are in your late 30s, early 40s, you're already there. And some of the changes that start occurring as we are getting closer to 40, 45, and 50, number one, we start having changes in muscle health. So as we are losing skeletal muscle, we are losing insulin sensitivity and we're replacing it with fat. Fat is not just something that most of us try to avoid. it is also in and of itself, it's its own endocrine organ. It's a very sophisticated organ. And so it's very inflammatory. And as you're losing the skeletal muscle, and most people don't know that we hit peak bone and muscle mass in our 20s and 30s. So if you're not actively working to prevent that muscle loss, you are losing out on your ability to maintain a healthy blood sugar. It is really that simple. Other things that are happening physiologically is that we are going into early ovarian failure. We are losing progesterone. And as our ovaries are producing less progesterone, our adrenals and our adrenal glands, they're designed to be an emergency backup system. But in our harried, overstressed existence, they are frequently being called upon all too often. And when you have less progesterone in your body, less circulating progesterone, you have relative estrogen dominance, meaning in conjunction, estrogen and progesterone are designed to balance one another out, but you have less circulating progesterone. So you start experiencing some of the side effects of more estrogen. So it could be heavier menstrual cycles, weight gain, breast tenderness, etc. But along with that loss of progesterone is changes to sleep patterns. So you may have trouble staying asleep, may have trouble falling asleep. You may experience more anxiety and depression. And so what I started seeing in a lot of my female clients and patients was, number one, if they went to their traditionally trained provider, appropriately so, the things that are offered to them are synthetic hormones, IUDs, ablations, and a hysterectomy, and or also antidepressants and anti-anxiety agents. And I remind everyone, I'm like, listen, there's a time and a place for everything, and there is zero judgment if you ascribe to any of those treatments during this time in your life. But it's also understanding with these hormonal changes, it can really impact your ability to sleep and to manage your mood. I think the other thing that starts to happen in perimenopause is that we're less stress resilient. So maybe you can get by with 5 hours of sleep and, CrossFit classes 5 days a week and eating a standard American diet and, not over exercising as another example, this kind of chronic cardio, long-term cardio,
Right.
avoiding weights. But in middle age, those things really don't serve you well. Suddenly sleep becomes very important. Stress management is critically important. And I assure you, it is not 5 minutes of meditation once a week. Inflammatory foods become an enormous problem. You think about the quality of the foods that we consume impact our neurotransmitters, they impact our gut microbiome, they impact a lot of things on a fairly substantial level. And then lastly, if we're doing chronic cardio, which is oftentimes spiking cortisol, and we're not lifting weights, again, we go back to that muscle, that muscle piece. Less muscle you have, the less calories you burn, the more insulin resistant you can eventually become. So understanding that we have to navigate these years a little differently. I'd be the first person to say we do a better job of honoring our bodies if we're doing it right, advocating for ourselves, creating more boundaries. But those are some of the key things that start to happen. But I think for a lot of women, I've had women tell me, I feel like I'm losing my mind, because all of a sudden their anxiety levels are so much higher than they've ever been before. They don't know what's happening. They're not sleeping. All of the strategies that they depended upon in their younger years are no longer effective. And that's why I think that along with some of these other changes, we just have to start making adjustments. And we have to really find a reframe. It's not a negative thing. We can turn it into a positive thing, but it's understanding that as our bodies are changing, we need to change along with them.
Absolutely. You need to change the strategies. And I completely agree with you about the stress piece, that 5 minutes of meditation is just not enough at all. And, it's a great place to start, really great place to start, and maybe establish a habit, but then you need to start building that to 10 minutes and 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30, 25 minutes, up to, I would say the sweet spot is anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes. And I don't know what you think about that, what you find is being helpful for your patient population, but that's at least that amount on a daily basis. And I know that's kind of hard to do for some people, but maybe then, splitting that up throughout the day is another strategy. But yeah, ultimately it really comes down to making it a focus. I usually tell my patients to put stress on the front burner, like that being the most important thing, because if you can get those cortisol levels down in terms that are caused by stress, then your hormones are going to be a little bit more balanced. Right.
I agree. Although it's interesting because I think that people think about stress management as like, I'll deal with that later. And to your point, there's a device called Muse, M-U-S-E. And so I got my husband meditating by using that, but it helps like with a little bit of reinforcement to remind people like, oh, well, you were really like in the zone for 5 minutes. And then you were thinking about the to-do list. And then you were thinking about, all the things you needed to be doing later in the day. I do think that, stress reduction modalities need to be practiced. So that's why like you start with 5 minutes of meditation and then you expand it. I think for me, connection with nature is really important. Like I get outside with my dogs every day, connection with nature. I think that it could be as simple as like putting your legs up the wall. It can be as simple as closing your eyes for 15 minutes. It can be as simple as like I have a PMF mat. And for me, that has been, as someone who runs kind of like type A and actively, I would say like I'm a reformed type A, I have to actively work at it. Getting a PMF mat where I have to lay still and be quiet has been very helpful. And for a lot of people exercise, but it's finding the right types of exercise. I think one thing that was always surprising to me was that the part of the country I lived in, there were a lot of runners, and runners in their 20s and 30s looked a little less haggard than their 40, 50, 60-year-old counterparts. And I had a lot of female friends that would, they got up and they ran 8 to 10 miles every single morning and they looked so haggard. And it's understanding that exercise, it's just like hormesis, hormetic stressors, beneficial stress in the right amount at the right time can be hugely impactful. But when you're doing too much all the time, and I think most of us are overachievers, and so we're constantly having to fine tune this, it's finding what stress reduction modalities work best for you. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to have a bunch of gadgets. I'm a gadget person. I like a variety of things, but sometimes as simple as saying no, having healthy boundaries, not saying yes to everything. I think we as women, we tend to be very accommodating. We tend to be people pleasers. And so just understanding that part of that growing awareness is understanding that you don't have to say yes to everything. And that in and of itself can be a valuable kind of first step towards managing your stress.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, it is noticing when you feel your body tensing up, and really getting in tune with your body. And all the strategies that you just mentioned are methods of getting in tune and being alone in the same time and space of your body and being grounded in your body. Because a lot of times people just are in their heads, and that's the only place that they're at. So yeah, excellent points. So let's get into the actual act of starting intermittent fasting. How would you say would be the easiest way to start? I know, it's a great tool. It's free, right? It's something that everyone can easily start, given some exceptions. And I think it's important to go over those exceptions. But for those people who have discussed it with their providers, about what would be the best way that it might be something good for them, what would be the best way for a person to start intermittent fasting?
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned having a conversation with their healthcare provider. I think that's critically important, especially if you're on medications. If you're on blood pressure medications, you're on diabetes medications, you're on anti-anxiety, antidepressants, because you may need adjustments in your medication. So number one is you have to stop snacking. We've conditioned generations of humans that they can't go more than a few hours without eating. And I would be the first person to identify that is one of the most detrimental things that has been kind of propagated over the last 50, 60 years, is that we need snacks and mini meals. No, we don't. We're grown adults. So number one, stop snacking, because that is going to force you to restructure your meals to make sure you're eating enough protein, healthy fats, and unprocessed carbohydrates. Number two is understanding that when you sit down and eat a meal, you really do need 30 to 50 grams of protein in every meal. So what I find in particular with women is they undereat protein, they overconsume carbohydrates, and they eat the wrong types of fat. So a lot of what I do is talking about protein sources, and I like a variety. I don't just think about chicken and steak and pork. I think people need a variety of protein. Animal-based protein is going to give a different amino acid profile than plant-based protein, but depending on the individual and who's listening, you may do a combination of both. Number two is understanding that depending on where you are life stage, so if you're a woman north of 40, it's not that you can't eat carbohydrates, but your relationship with them needs to change. And so it may be that you measure your sweet potato. It may be that you have a very small amount of rice, because I find as women are aging, they're becoming more insulin resistant, and therefore the carbohydrate portions become of issue. And then we talk about healthy fats. So there are two ingredients that I always say no one should consume. Number one are seed oils, and seed oils are highly inflammatory, very rancid. We know that they contribute to not only carbohydrate addiction, but also insulin resistance. And when we're looking at the seed oils, we're talking about soybean, which is the number one consumed fat in the United States right now, canola oil, safflower, sunflower, etc. Those are the seed oils, and they proliferate in the processed food industry. So you need to read your food labels. When you go to restaurants, you need to ask, what is my $100 steak cooked in? Because more often than not, it is cooked in canola oil because it's cheap. But understanding that the healthy fats are things like olive oil, olives, coconut oil, nuts and seeds, butter, grass-fed butter, ghee, etc., all really good sources of fats. But as an example, if you're having a ribeye, you have a lot of healthy fats in that steak or the piece of salmon. You don't need to add 5 avocados to your meal. This is one of the things I see people kind of getting stuck with, versus you have a filet or a chicken breast, leaner cut of meat or fish or poultry, and then you can add in, maybe you have maybe you have some macadamia nuts, maybe you add some butter to your broccoli that you're consuming. But helping people understand that putting those macros together is step 2. Step 3 is going from dinner to breakfast without eating. Now, a lot of us are late night snackers. We know, based on research, even Sachin Panda's research, when you look at that 2 to 3 hour before bedtime can be very, very important to not impact the start of secretion of melatonin. Because when you eat a big food bolus an hour or two before bed, you're suppressing melatonin, you're increasing cortisol. You have all these little clocks throughout our body. They're not just in our brain. People talk about the pineal gland, and yes, there's this suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain, but there are also clocks throughout our digestive system to kind of give our body cues about when it's time to go to bed, when it's time to wake up. And so understanding that, another aspect of meal timing is understanding that 2 to 3 hours before bed should really, for the most part, be very protected. And so how many of us during the pandemic were having wine at night and junk food because we were stressed and we were trying to mitigate and manage these uncomfortable feelings? So the next thing that you go to is, once you have mastered not eating from dinner to breakfast, is slowly opening up that fasting window. So maybe it's 13 hours to start, maybe that's 13 and a half, then you go to 14. And it's important to understand, like, I'm an advocate of clean fasting, which means when I am talking to people about fasting, it's helping them understand what can you consume in a fasted state. So bitter coffee, bitter tea, and bitter is important. Bitter, although our flavor profiles are really leaning into sugary, sweet things, it's important to understand that those bitter plant-based compounds give our bodies valuable information. These polyphenols are giving our bodies very important bits of information. Some of it helps boost fat oxidation. So what can you add to your coffee? I usually say, if you're really struggling with the bitterness of the coffee, you can add high quality salt like Redmond's. You can add cinnamon. Cinnamon will help with insulin sensitivity. Neither of those will break your fast. Black tea, green tea, both beneficial. I admittedly have never been a coffee drinker, but I do drink green tea almost every day. What I do is I brew it, I ice it, and that's how I enjoy drinking it. But for each one of us, finding out what works and then ensuring that you're properly hydrated. Most of us walk around being clinically dehydrated and just don't realize it. And so adding in unflavored electrolytes, things that we lose in the context of being in a fasted state. Yes, we lose this with urination. Especially if you've gone from a standard American diet to eating lower carbohydrate, we have stored glycogen. When glycogen stores kind of break down and they're lost from the body, we can lose valuable electrolytes, especially sodium. A lot of times when people are new to fasting and they're eating a lower carbohydrate diet, notice I'm not saying ketogenic, but lower carbohydrate diet, they'll have headaches, they'll be nauseous, they just feel badly. And a great deal of those symptoms are mitigated by this loss of electrolytes. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. But the goal is to eventually get to 16 hours fasted with an 8-hour feeding window. Now, another important concept is understanding that men and women need to fast differently. So men and menopausal women that have gone 12 months without a menstrual cycle, not as much hormonal fluctuation day to day, week to week. And so they can generally get by with being able to fast every day, versus my very lean, thin 20-something women that are still at peak fertility years, even if they're choosing right then not to have children. Very different from my obese 35-year-old that has polycystic ovarian syndrome and could benefit from eating less frequently versus the perimenopausal woman. So there's really a continuum in helping women understand that depending on where they are in their menstrual cycle, there's a time to fast and there's a time not to fast, and helping women understand that, really understanding the way that their physiology exists, whether it's, the follicular phase when estrogen predominates, or the progesterone phase when, the luteal phase when progesterone predominates, understanding there's a time and a place to fast. And there are times in your cycle where maybe you're just doing 12 hours of digestive rest, and that is completely okay. Right. In terms of who should not be fasting, right. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about individuals that have had a history of eating disordered behavior, whether it's anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating. Unless you and your psychiatrist, psychologist, or eating disorder specialist have determined that you are in a position where you are healed enough, and there were always exceptions. I have met several women who have been able to, work through their eating disorder behavior by intermittent fasting. But again, it's on a case-by-case basis. I think about individuals that are pregnant or breastfeeding. Fasting has no place with women that are either growing a human or feeding a human. This is not a time to restrict your caloric intake in order to lose weight or change body composition. I always say when you're done being pregnant or you're done breastfeeding, you can certainly integrate that. I don't think it's a strategy for children and not even teens. So when young adults are done growing, I think it is completely reasonable. But I have all teenagers in my house, and I would never encourage them. The amount of food they eat is ridiculous. They're both athletic teen boys.
Growing. Yeah, they're growing.
Exactly, and they're growing. So we would never want to restrict their food intake. The other thing I think about are individuals that have chronic health issues that are not particularly stable. So if you have chronic, if you're a vasculopath, so if you've got diffuse cardiovascular disease, cerebral vascular disease, peripheral vascular disease, if you are someone that has brittle diabetes and you're not aware when your blood sugar is low, if you're an individual that has had a transplant of some kind, and I have met several of these individuals, so I feel like I want to honor them by talking about this, unless they are in conjunction with their treating medical provider, not a great idea. But I find for most other individuals, unless they're not at a healthy weight, let's be clear. Like if someone's been in a hospital, they lost a bunch of weight, not the time to fast. In most other instances, most adults should go at least 12 hours a day without eating. But it's on a case-by-case basis. I have a woman that we were talking about before we started recording. She's in her 50s, just started fasting, felt great for a while. And then we started doing testing, and her cortisol levels are sky high. And she tells me, I feel edgy when I'm in a fasted state. And so sure enough, her levels were her cortisol levels were so high that I said, let's take a break and let's reassess things and see where you are. And so right now she's taking a break. And I said, there's sometimes a season in our lives when we can't fast, and that's okay. But it's helping people understand that fasting may not be the right strategy for everyone.
Right. I mean, sometimes people, when they don't eat, they become hypoglycemic and jittery and anxious and moody, hangry. Right. So those are signs that maybe intermittent fasting is not good for you. So can you explain why those kinds of symptoms happen and what to do about it? Like how do you pivot from that when that kind of thing, other than just stopping fasting? Is there a way to surpass that?
Well, I think that many people think hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, or reactive hypoglycemia, is benign. It is not benign. Mm-hmm. And I remind people that if your insulin receptors on your cells are just kind of lazy, or they're lagging, or they're just not working properly, that could be mitigating some of it. And that could be like a very first sign of some degree of insulin resistance. So number one, helping people understand that they have to plan their meals properly. So again, we go back to the protein, the healthy fats, the right types of carbohydrates. And most of my middle-aged women, I'm not a huge fan of processed carbs for them. They really do need to get back to eating root vegetables and, low glycemic fruits and lots of non-starchy vegetables. That is superior to eating bread and rice and pasta and things that we know have been refined enough that it could actually adversely impact their blood sugar regulation. So I think it starts with the macros piece. For some people, they can't go long periods of time because their blood sugar is just so unstable. So in some instances, maybe they are eating every 3 to 4 hours. Maybe they're having a tablespoon of MCT oil when they start feeling jittery and anxious. They're having a little bit of MCT oil. I like healthy fats. I do find that they can manage and kind of mitigate some issues if people are just feeling like they're really struggling with going more than 2 to 3 hours between meals. It's also helping them identify like what exactly, like this is where diagnostic testing can be helpful. Like, let's see what's really going on. What's your fasting insulin? What's your leptin? What's going on with your inflammatory markers? Getting a glucometer, because we may perceive that they're jittery, feeling anxious, maybe because of low blood sugar. It could be that their blood sugar is actually high. So knowledge is power. And so those are the people that I'm like, let's get a glucometer. I want you to check your blood sugar when you feel that way. More often than not, it's because their blood sugar is actually high. And so really helping them understand, like if your blood sugar like, let's say your blood sugar before you eat is 90 per deciliter, and it goes to 160 after you eat a meal. What does that tell you? Probably that you had too much carbohydrate. So, okay, next time, what can we do differently? So I tend to get very granular, and I want to get, I want them to start tracking information. How much protein did you have? You know, Chronometer is a great a great app for tracking not only macros, but also micros. So looking at those micronutrients, are they getting good quality sleep? Because I find that a lot of people struggle with sleep. You know, I have an Oura Ring. I'm a gigantic data nerd, so I love to track REM and deep sleep. But when we start looking, like all of a sudden, like your sleep is terrible, you're waking up in the middle of the night because your blood sugar is plummeting because you ate like a huge bowl of ice cream before you went to bed. So a lot of it is this patient education piece of helping them understand protein goes with everything. It's like, you know, I'm dating myself, but granimals were like these little characters. You could put the tags together, you could figure out what coordinated, but protein goes with everything. So if you have a meal, you'll have protein and a healthy fat, or protein and a carb. There's no other exceptions. You never have carbohydrates by themselves, and certainly not if you know that you've got some degree of blood sugar dysregulation. So to me, I've had really, really good success just helping people understand what's going on.
Right.
The other piece is
I agree with you. I do use the CGM as well to sort of track data for certain patients. Some insurances do pay for that. So it's kind of tough to get that paid for unless you have a diagnosis of diabetes or some kind of blood sugar dysregulation diagnosis. But I think it's worth even paying out of pocket sometimes just to get that data. But you know, I would love for you to just list off the different vegetables when you say, you know, instead of eating carbs, like root vegetables. If you can just list off different types of foods to help mitigate that those blood sugar dysregulation.
So I think I think the most important thing is that protein piece. So 30 to 50 grams of protein, and understanding what that represents. So that's number one. Number two, if the protein doesn't already have healthy fats in it, adding, you know, and being mindful, like healthy fats are more calorically dense, although I'm not focused on calories. I like people to understand protein and carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram versus fats are 9. So just understanding that, you know, that portion of healthy fat, if you're not aware of what a quarter cup looks like or an eighth of a cup, like you may actually want to, or a tablespoon for that matter, you may want to measure that out. When I'm talking about healthy carbohydrates, I like to think about vegetables and fruit as a 3-to-1 ratio. So 3 vegetables for 1 piece of fruit. Most Americans do the opposite. So it's understanding that things like arugula, spinach, kale, if you tolerate it, celery, understanding like asparagus, broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, radicchio, starchy vegetables. So, you know, white potato, sweet potato, plantains. Plantains, I guess technically could be a fruit or a vegetable. It's like I've seen differing opinions on that, but parsnips, rutabagas are all good options. And you don't necessarily have to have a lot. Like I know on a higher carbohydrate day for me, it could be I have half a cup. I mean, it's not a lot of extra carbohydrate. I'm also very insulin sensitive. Talking about low glycemic fruits. So berries, citrus fruits, you know, tart apples. Unfortunately, most apples are designed to be super sweet. So like the Granny Smith, you know, those green apples, the things that my grandmother used to have around in her house that were pretty tart, like they'd almost make your mouth pucker. Grapefruit, those things are going to be better choices than like a tropical fruit. But I do think that whether it's mango, papaya, banana, if you're insulin sensitive, you can probably handle those fruits. But if you're not, and that's most Americans, it's only 7% of the population right now is metabolically healthy. If you're part of that 93%, then you probably need to be doing more vegetables, more fiber, more protein, and worry less about the fruits, and really understand that the way to kind of master your metabolism is to understand that you have to change your relationship with nutrition. You absolutely have to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very important to really start with the macros before everybody you start doing intermittent fasting. You got to get those healthy foods on board. And I agree with you that sometimes people overdo it with the fats because they do actually cause weight gain. Some women have not really proportioned it properly, and they're wondering why they're gaining weight. And so we always have to bring it back to the proportions of protein to fat. So I'm really glad you did a beautiful job of laying that out. Thank you so much. So, let's talk about how intermittent fasting is beneficial to the brain and why. What's going on that it actually can cause an improvement in your mental health?
This is one of my favorite ways to talk about the benefits of fasting. So I think long before the changes in body composition and weight loss, many people, when they are in an unfed state and their insulin levels are low, their body's able to, if they're metabolically flexible, their body's able to break down fatty acids, and fatty acids are a very effective way to utilize fuel. But there's another type of fuel substrate called ketones. And so if our body's able to produce specific types of ketones, and one in particular called BDNF, will actually diffuse across the blood-brain barrier. And so brain-derived neurotrophic factor is a great way. People will say, oh my gosh, I have so much mental clarity, I have so much energy, I can get so much done. And I'm all about efficiency. And I'll tell people, like, once you hit that sweet spot with fasting, when your body can use either stored glycogen or stored fatty acids for a fuel source, oh my gosh, that is like you're opening up a whole different way of living. You're not having energy slumps. You feel like tremendously productive. So on a lot of different levels, we understand that fuel in our brains, in terms of what is most effective, is, fat is a fuel source. And so our brains love fat. Our brains are comprised of a great deal of fat. And so I think that efficiency piece really can be hugely impactful, and understanding that our body wants to be able to be very efficient, wants to be able to use carbs, fats, ketones as fuel sources. They don't want it to just be using carbohydrates. And again, most of us that are listening are not particularly metabolically efficient. And that explains why we don't feel so mentally clear. We don't have as much energy. We struggle when we, get like 2 hours or an hour after eating a meal, or we're weight loss resistant. And those are definitely signs that our body or our mitochondria are not able to properly and effectively utilize energy to, well, they're not able to use the energy to be able to create energy. And so that can become problematic.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it could also improve your mood, right? Significantly improve your mood as well. And so it's been great talking about what to eat, but also knowing when to eat is really important, and really paying attention to how food affects you, you know, uh, before, after, and the time in between. It gives you so much information. That is so beautiful, the way you laid it all out to really explain all of that. So yeah, and so I know that you have your book, and the intermittent fasting transformation, and you have a free I think Facebook group that you are asking people to join. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it's intermittent fasting lifestyle / my name. And it was created initially just to have a place where people like-minded, there are men and women in the group. It's very
Mhm.
supportive. I'm completely anti-drama, so there's none of that in the group. And my team and I actually do moderate. So, we let a couple questions in every day. But it's really been a great place for us to, get a sense of what content resonates, what content works, what is not working. And it definitely gives me a sense of the support that people are looking for. So it's been a great kind of social experiment, but that is completely free, and that's on Facebook. I know that Facebook may not be everyone's favorite place to be, but that appears to be the easiest place to kind of house this group. But yeah, we're almost 11,000 members. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so I look at it as kind of it's a nice group of individuals that are like-minded.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Yeah. So I know we're going to put in the show notes where to find you, and how to get your book. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that you feel might put this nice bow around this package? Anything that you want to add?
Yeah, so I'm a huge proponent of, you know, it, I guess I should say, like, for full transparency, over the last 7 years, I've been using a lot of supplements and lifestyle strategies to figure out how to support sleep and mood. And there are two supplements that I've come out with in the past couple months. One is creatine monohydrate, which, if you don't know, women produce, or actually have 70 to 80% less intracellular stores than men. And it's important not just for muscular health, but metabolic health, brain health, but also myo-inositol is our new supplement that's coming out. And it's been a game changer for sleep for myself and like hundreds and hundreds of patients that I've used it in. It helps with blood sugar response. It has really good, solid research on mood support, of course, in conjunction with your licensed healthcare professional. We are never suggesting that anyone stop any medications. You want to have conversations, but can be an adjunct to traditional therapies. And so those are probably the two things that I've been doing as of late that have been it's been really wonderful to see, the impact of like well-researched products and components, how that can influence, my paradigms are really focused on metabolic health, muscle health, and sleep support, brain and cognition. So yeah, those are our new things.
Yeah, those are really important to remind people that you still have to do all the other lifestyle things, the stress reduction and management and sleep, making sure that you're sleeping well. So, I do have patients who take inositol, but you're mentioning myo-inositol. Is there a difference?
There is. So there are quite a few inositols that are made in the body, but this one in particular is the one that has been most well researched for insulin resistance, brain health. I'm happy to share some research with you outside of the podcast. But to me, it was interesting because I'm always the N of one. Anything that I ask anyone to do, I've done myself. And as a middle-aged woman, it is the one supplement in my sleep stack that has made the biggest difference. It helps with sleep onset and helps if you wake up in the middle of the night, you'll go to bed, you'll fall back to sleep faster. And it's not just myself, but other, experts in the field are finding that to be the case, and it's inexpensive. And so, one of the biggest pain points for my patient population is sleep. And so if I can do all the lifestyle and then layer in a supplement that's going to help them kind of comprehensively, that's a win-win.
Great. Awesome. So I really appreciate you telling my audience about your knowledge on intermittent fasting. And it's been a great pleasure having you on board. I know you have a very busy schedule, so I feel blessed to have you here and share your knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.